What about rules within committee? What bills to take up, debate, report, vote on? There's different rules, and in the House, there's a lot of discretion with the chairman to decide which rules are going to be, set up for the committee. In the Senate,
Yeah.
is it the same? Can you talk about the rules and which ones are work and which ones are less good for the committees as a whole?
Yeah, the House and Senate are different in this way too. In the House, there's a system of joint referral. So a bill is introduced, the parliamentarian decides which committee it's assigned to. And say a bill reads on two different committees' jurisdiction. In the House, it gets referred to both committees and, one after another. And really kind of puts a premium on sticking to one subject matter in the House. If you're on that committee, you want your bill to be managed in that committee. You don't want to go into some other committee and God knows what happens to it there. In the Senate, it's a single subject rule for everything except the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And so the parliamentarian looks at it and says, what is this mostly about? And that's the committee that gets it. So it creates a little more liberality. In terms of internal committee procedures, that's just all by custom. And it's really all just at the power of the chairman. And over the years, I saw various revolts in judiciary where a certain procedure was used, for delay within the committee, kind of filibuster within committee. And eventually that procedure gets, canceled by the chairman because he's sick of these delays or these processes. We move on. But each committee really is, in terms of internal procedure, it's really every senator's own little, every chairman's own little fiefdom, and there's really no getting around that. I recall once when we were working on these national security issues, there was a lot of focus at one point on the Bush administration's claim to inherent authority to do national security surveillance. And it's an aspect of the president's inherent powers and, can't be regulated by Congress. And had a couple of hearings on this. And then after a controversial set of hearings, there was important information that was provided by the Bush administration. And on the committee's listserv, the press shop, circulated this information from the administration. And I remember a staffer from Senator Feingold's office did a reply all to everything, the 100 or 200 people on this judiciary email chain saying, I demand to know why the chairman, gave this to the press first and talked to them about it before sharing with the committee is required by, committee rules. And it's like, come on. And I ended up sending a reply all to him saying, dear so-and-so, the chairman's right to take first dibs on any available press opportunity is an aspect of his inherent powers and cannot be divested by committee rules. The chairman just has a lot of discretion in how to run these things, especially when it comes to press opportunities.
And do you think that's a good thing?
It's just reality. You can't have a system where you have these rules and things can be appealed. People just need to get along on committees. And in the end, again, the committees, what happens in committee is just the beginning of the process. If a committee does something very, when I used to monitor bills out of other committees or even judiciary, if it came out on a party line vote, you kind of stop paying attention, with the filibuster in the Senate, unless one party has 60 votes or something, which is, happened once, but is very rare. That bill's not going anywhere if they haven't been able to work out any kind of a deal. Now, when a bill comes out of Senate Judiciary and it got 2/3, 3/4 of the members, it's a bill that has legs, especially, or if it came out unanimously, and that's something that's going to happen. The chairman can be as much of a tyrant as he wants, but ultimately his power depends on his ability, to cut a deal. And if you're just reporting a bunch of bills out of your committee as chairman on party line votes, and you've just incensed the minority, you ain't legislating. You're sending a bunch of stuff to nowhere. You can have the most beautiful bill that gets out of committee, a beautifully written report, etc. If it doesn't pass both bodies and get signed into law by the president, it doesn't count for anything.
Well, this kind of comes to the question of what's a good congressman, or even a senator or a staffer. Do you define that as getting their bills through? Do you define it? How do you define someone's job as having them doing a good job or as not a good job?
Yeah, I think that what matters as a member is how you're influencing legislation, and not all members agree on that. But to me, the fact and I was very struck by this when I was there. How many people in the American system have the ability to change the law? Senators and congressmen have that power. It's a pretty nifty power, and was always a little surprised when I saw a new senator who was very interested in the Supreme Court and wanting to file amicus briefs or speechifying. Like, I'd concentrate on just writing laws if I were you. It's a pretty unique and important power. You definitely get the members who just love being a member for its own sake. The guy who ran for student body president when he was in middle school and just loves being the center of attention, and or the older members who love speaking to groups of high school students that come over. And it just it's very when I first started in the Senate, especially, there were a lot of I think there are still a lot of old senators, but there were some really old ones there. Thurmond and Hollings were still there, and they used to say, Senate's the world's best nursing home. You have the staff of basically 40, 50 people that take care of everything for you. It's all these young people. It's kind of invigorating to be around them. You're treated as very important. People come from the home state and want to meet with you and hang on to your every word. It's beats the heck out of most real nursing homes. So you can see why people stick around. And then of course you also get the members who they're going to be president one day, and that's their plan, and everything they do is oriented towards one day running for president. And as you can imagine, those members often also don't focus that much on their legislative powers. But to me, the ones who really matter are the ones who focus on the details of legislation. That's where you can really have a big impact on the country. I think you asked also what makes a good member in that sense. If you agree with me that that's what's important. When I started, I would have thought like, being very lawyerly and detail oriented is critical for a member. And then I realized, especially in the Senate, these guys are spread so thin, and you have a ton of staff. You really need to rely on the staff to keep you apprised of issues and do the legal research. A senator doesn't have time to look into the case law and how a statute was interpreted over time and figure out what the relevant terms of art are. You really need to rely on your staff, and what the members and even the more senior staff, what they really need to have is good political judgment. And by political judgment, I don't mean as much the national political debates, but just a sense of how the body works. And when we did the patent bill, I remember at one point we were debating when to bring up a manager's amendment and bring a vote on it. And Senator Leahy was the chairman at the time, had this very senior staffer who just had been there a lot and had a sense of when it's appropriate to bring up a manager's amendment and request a vote, and just how things are done in the Senate. And getting along with your colleagues and cutting deals, things like that's what's really important to the members. For the staff, you want someone detail oriented, someone who goes through those annotations of the statutes and knows the legal minefields and traps that are out there. And just good lawyers. It's someone who can really understands the issues that matter in legislation. I used to say writing a bill is like litigating in reverse. You're trying to envision all the scenarios where this will matter, and et cetera. And in addition to looking through past case law, you really just need to meet with constituents and affected industries and get their perspective on, well, if the text is written this way, how would that work in their industry, et cetera. Sometimes when we were moving a bill like the patent bill, I'd religiously follow all the blogs and other information about it, because sometimes some random lawyer out in another part of the country who's looking at this draft bill spots a real flaw, and it's a great kind of crowdsourcing way of fixing things. There are things I changed in the patent bill at various points simply because I saw a blog post by a lawyer who probably had no idea anyone on the Hill was paying attention, but they spot a real issue. And you want to fix those things. I also used to say, especially with a big bill, there's always something that needs a technical correction later, and there's always something you wished you drafted differently. So ideally, you just want to vet it as thoroughly as possible to minimize those mistakes, because you'll never get rid of all of them. I've never seen a big bill that was perfect and you didn't need any technical corrections later.
So, you bring up an interesting point here where, the staff have to be super detailed, and they're doing a lot of the analysis and even collecting information from the constituents. What about tools that the staff and the member can use to do that? I mean, in the case that you just described, it was a blogger somewhere who gave you some insights right into the bill text and what the impact might be if that were passed, right? What kinds of tools were available to you to do this kind of research, to do this kind of crowdsourcing? What kind of tools do you think should be available?
The growth of the development of the internet is just a fantastic thing for this type of stuff, just the easy access to information. It really, completely changes your world as a, well, frankly, as any kind of lawyer, but also, in this role where, you're trying to find any source of information or anything that's relevant. Just the, ability to run a search and find, whatever refers to an issue just gives you access to information that would have been unimaginable, in the days of yore, when everything is filtered and only if certain publications pick it up. It's really a wonderful thing. I mean, just the fact that, random patent lawyer who's kind of interested in the bill and has thought hard about it can share their thoughts, on the web, not have any connection to journalists, no political connections or anything. They just post their thoughts on the web. And, as someone working on Capitol Hill, or even as a lobbyist for an industry, you can find this and, find relevant information. It's just a wonderful thing. It's hard to imagine how people did things before.
Now, what about mistakes, or, when you're giving advice to other staffers or even members or senators? What are some of the mistakes you'd seen over the years, or things people shouldn't do, or certain behaviors they should avoid?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of staff don't stay very long on the Hill. Some staff do stay long, but they work for a member who's more inactive. So, you're helping that coordinate that high school group, that's coming to talk to the senator, or you're monitoring the constituent mail, making sure it's getting out on time. Senators receive thousands of letters from constituents every week. So there's plenty of kind of non-substantive stuff to fill your time with. And then, there are just a few staff. I think there are about 15,000 staff who work on Capitol Hill. And only a pretty small sliver of those actually work on, drafting legislation that becomes law. And often you get people who just, don't have as much experience, haven't been, or don't have the benefit of that senior staffer who has judgment on how to see things move forward. And the toughest calls that you have to make on the Hill, and the ones where I've seen people most frequently make mistakes, are, when do I cut a deal? You're the staffer in charge of some substantial bill that's moving, and you're finally getting through the committee or floor time, and you're having to deal with the other side or people who have some kind of concern or something. And there are two mistakes that people make. One is you cut the deal where you got your bill, and the bill's now kind of an empty shell. I remember talking once with a IP counsel for the American Bar Association. He used to work for the House of Representatives, and he said that they used to have this kind of sarcastic saying there, that the odds of a bill getting enacted into a law are inversely proportional to how much it still addresses the problem it originally set out to address. You have this great idea that's going to solve this problem, but people don't want that problem solved. And to finally get your bill done, you have to, take out the parts that really make a difference. A fair amount of that happens. The other mistake, the opposite, and I've seen this made probably even more often, is, you have your bill, you're going to change the world, completely solve this problem for society in some area, and every part of it is precious. It's like your own child. And someone, you're on the Senate floor, you're running into opposition. The opposition is coalesced around, one change they want to one part of your bill, and you won't give them that last 5 cents, and you won't cut a deal with them. And I always told people, look, when you're in that situation, and someone's asking for 5%, even 10% of your bill, just give it to them, and because what I've seen happen repeatedly is, they wouldn't budge. The opposition became firm. Eventually they couldn't get cloture. The leadership, realized this is a waste of time. This bill isn't moving, and it's pulled. And, there aren't many second chances for legislation. Once the leadership has lost confidence in your ability to manage the bill, it tends to, that tends to be the end of it. And I've seen many an occasion where I thought, the people who are managing that bill, I bet you they really regret now that they can't get that 95%, 90% version of what they could have gotten at one point if they had just, been more accommodating at that critical point. And it's the toughest call you have to make as a staffer or a bill manager, because you have to decide what's really important. And, you're just giving up a certain amount of ego. You really hate those guys who've been fighting you. They've been nothing but a nuisance. You don't want to give them anything. You want to stick it to them. And so, no, I'm not going to give them that last 5% that they're demanding now. You really need to kind of maintain a certain level of humility and modesty, and just, settle for, frankly, anything that's at least half a loaf or 3/4 of a loaf is still a good deal, and advances the process. And maybe someone will get that last element in another couple of Congresses and another bill.
Well, this leads to this polarization question. When people don't want to compromise, during the time you were on the Hill versus today, people talk about increasing polarization, and what is your thought on that process? Why is it harder to compromise now, or is that just an illusion? Are they compromising just as much as before? It's the coverage that's changed.
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. To some extent, look, House members and Senate members are elected by constituents who read the same media, and as we're increasingly media polarized into a society where people don't just watch the CBS Evening News in the evening like they did in the 80s, which certainly had its own biases. But now Republicans watch Fox, Democrats watch MSNBC and CNN, and listen to each side's conspiracy theories. The Senate's a reflection. The Senate and House are a reflection of society, and the more we're a polarized society, the more it's going to be a polarized Congress as well. But the other thing I'd say is, to some extent, it was ever thus. I mean, people used to say, "Oh, this Congress is the worst ever." I tell them, "Well, I was here for the 108th," and there was this unfortunate incident where a Republican staffer on Judiciary found out how to hack into the Democrats' databases and got into their files. And believe me, there was a lot of unhappiness about that, and that was there was some tension after that. Not as bad as the tension following the unpleasantness of January 6th, but there have been high emotions and tensions. And what I've seen is, yeah, people are really mad at each other, but it's hard to stay so mad that out of spite you're not going to do anything. So yeah, I'm really mad about what this guy did here, or he's just a bad person, and therefore I'm not going to work on patent reform legislation that doesn't really have a political charge. And by the way, I have some pretty important constituents that would like this legislation. It would benefit them. And when you're all packed together, the members actually do, in the Senate especially, they do have relationships with each other, and they do work behind the scenes and eventually figure out how to get along. Some of the members have been there an awfully long time and have seen things come and go. And what's the point, frankly, unless you're the guy who's definitely going to become president one day? What's the point of being a senator all those years if you're not getting something done that affects public policy? Almost everyone came into this, except for the future presidents, with some notion of they're patriotic people, and they have their different visions of what's good for America, but they want to get things done. And as polarized and as angry as people are at different times, when legislation finally comes along, it's hard to say no, I'm gonna to cut off my nose to spite my face and not work on anything at all. And things were pretty polarized under Obama, and we got a major patent reform legislation done in 2011, despite all of the high emotions over all kinds of other issues. Members across the aisle managed to still work together on legislation.
All right. Well, you ready to move on to our lightning round of questions I ask all of our guests?
Sure. Yeah.
That way we can compare the answers and see if they all come out the same or totally different. My first one here is, what do you think congressional representation should mean?
It just means, we're a democracy, and congressional representation is just our way of channeling the popular will and ensuring that the government really does more or less have the consent of the people.
So when we talk about this notion of doing the will of the people, now the senator or the member, do you consider them to be exercising their own judgment about the interests of their constituents, or are they reflecting just what are the stated beliefs of those individuals?
It's a mix of the two, and sometimes it's good that it's a mix. Sometimes your constituents are angry for the wrong reason and are demanding Congress do things that are not in the public interest, and it's a passion that'll cool eventually. Sometimes members were originally influenced by some entrenched interest that's getting an unfair advantage in the system, and the public increasingly becomes aware of this and complains about it. And The senator or congressman over time realizes, if I want to get reelected, I really have to respond to what people really think about this issue, and not just what the party's traditional position was, or what certain interests wanted, in which the members definitely, genuinely believed what they were doing originally were the right thing. But when you see sustained public opposition, sometimes it's a good thing, that they are forced to address those issues. What's important to the people in the long term, gets addressed.
All right, next question is, how would your ideal Congress allocate its time? And by that, it could mean legislation versus oversight, in the district or in the home state versus DC.
As much time as they can spend on both oversight and legislating, the better. It's important to go back to and meet with constituents, although constituents often come and meet with you as well. People sometimes decry that there's so much emphasis, with air travel now, on going back and going to events all the time in a district, and members don't have as much time to meet with each other. I think there's probably something to that. It would be better if in the House, especially if they had more time to interact in Washington. But now it's important to stay in touch with constituents as well, and hear what people are thinking about.
So would you give it a percentage time? Is it 2 weeks on, 1 week off? Is it half and half? Is it 10% in the district?
Probably something closer to the first number you gave. Legislating is their main job, and they should be spending the bulk of 2/3 of their time in Washington, actually working on bills.
Right. Next one is, how should debate, deliberation, or dialogue occur or be structured in Congress?
I think the current system is pretty good. In the Senate, you can air things out as long as you want, and with only 100 members and more collegiality, that tends to work itself out. In the House, look, with 435 people, you can't have unlimited debate. Things need to be regulated a bit more. You can't rely on a system of unanimous consent in the House, for example. I have seen that happen when the patent bill moved. At one point, there was a dispute over whether a vote was called short on an amendment, and just to calm passions on it, the parliamentarian said, look, the only way to reopen the vote is by unanimous consent. And the members allowed it just so that there wouldn't be this narrative going forward that a vote was cut short. But I think that's the only time I ever saw that. Otherwise, you do need a more structured process and more limited debate and amendments in the House for it to be able to function.
And do you think those debates and discussions should happen in committees or on the floor or in private?
All three. The committee is a good chance to get an initial draft going. The floor is a check on, did the committee, really, cut the right deal, or was the committee was the committee's, reflection of public interest itself distorted in a way? And you see this vary across issues. I work for the Judiciary Committee, which tends to be very partisan. And I remember at one point, Larry Craig joined the committee, former senator from Idaho, and his legislative director expressed to us surprise at how partisan the committee was. And, we said, well, what do you mean? Aren't all committees like this? And she said, oh, no, not at all. And she'd staffed the senator on a number of other committees. And she said, on natural resources, for example, it's the Western states versus, the Eastern states. The Western states have all these big federal lands and are interested in using them in different ways and are fighting with the rest of the country about that. And then she said, on the Appropriations Committee, it's the committee itself versus the rest of Congress. It's how much money can we spend before they shut us down? It's a entirely different dynamic. So, you do need that. You do need the rest of the body's check on those committees, especially the ones where the committee over time tends to be dominated by some particular interest that's adverse to the interests of the public as a whole.
All right, next one is, what fundamental institutional improvement should Congress make within 50 years?
I think our structure is pretty good. One thing that always stayed with me is when I was in high school, I did a year as an exchange student in France. And at one point in the history class, we all had to they studied the United States. And the teacher mentioned, the U.S. has had the same constitution since the 18th century, which, just seemed amazing, to them. I mean, France has been through 2 republics in the, I guess, 3 in the 20th century. just to have that level of legal stability. But a system doesn't survive that long unless it works. And, that is kind of the genius of the Constitution. They really, especially from the chaos of the days of Articles of Confederation, the framers really got a lot of experience on kind of government dynamics and how you structure a system so that, regardless of what your agenda is or what you want to accomplish, it just works as a way of filtering government power, and in particular filtering legislation. And the bicameral system works quite well. It ensures stability, but not too much stability. There was a point in France's post-revolutionary history when Napoleon really wanted to cripple the legislative system. They had a bicameral legislature. So you know what he did to cripple it? He created a third legislative body. So it was a tricameral legislature, and that pushed it over the edge. Now nothing could get done. It's hard enough to coordinate two bodies. Three just became impossible, and that led pretty quickly to Emperor Napoleon. I think we have it right with two. One would concentrate too much power and one set of leadership, et cetera. It's good to force them to compromise with another body and sort out interests that way. Oh, and in terms of little things that might be fixed, I'd suggest wouldn't be bad if in some ways they professionalize the system of staff. Right now, just each member hires and pays their staff whatever they want, and it wouldn't be bad if they had more of a cadre of professional staff who are treated more like regular government employees. You get a higher quality of people that way. If the staff aren't strong enough to handle legislation themselves, that power drifts away to lobbyists and private interests, which sometimes is fine, but it generally would be better if Congress itself had more control over how legislation is being crafted, and who knows where all the bodies are buried in the text. And then the only other thing I could think of that would improve the process is to have better press coverage of what's going on the Hill from both sides. In some ways, the press coverage is actually better these days than it was in the past. At least both sides tend to get aired out, but you definitely would need that disinfectant of sunshine on things going on the Hill to make sure the process is really operating in the public interest.
Great. Well, next one is, what book or article most shaped your thinking with respect to Congress and congressional reform?
I have to say I don't really have an answer for that one. I never really read that. When you're on the Hill and doing it, you tend not to read theoretical stuff about the Hill. I had people, Robert Caro's Master of the Senate came out while I was working on the Hill, and some of the staff I worked with read that and recommended it to me, told me I'd love it, but I never got around to reading it. So I'll plug that one. It came highly recommended, but I can't say I've read it myself.
Excellent. So what's your plan moving forward? Is it private practice from here on out, or do you have any other interest in getting back on the Hill or
private
executive branch?
I'm done with government. Happy to work with clients and help advance their interests. I'm quite comfortable in that phase of my career now.
Great. Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking time with us.
You're welcome.